Members, I think it's half past. We'll start. Members? Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Licensing Appeals Committee, 21st of July. Before we start, I'm just going to read the emergency evacuation announcement. Should we be required to evacuate the building, would you please leave the room via the same door you came in? Turn right out of the main doors into the car park, which is the assembly point. Please do not delay your evacuation to collect any belongings. Please do not return to the building until given permission to do so by council staff. Please note this meeting is being audio recorded, and can we make sure our mobiles are either switched off or switched to silent. Members, when I invite you to speak, please ensure you have one of the microphones in front of you before speaking, as microphones are needed for the hearing loop and for the audio recording. These should all be switched on okay already for you to speak, so do not adjust them. Please make sure that the microphone is directly in front of you before speaking. Members, voting will be done on a show of hands this evening in line with the Constitution. I will ask for a show of hands for and then against recommendations. Those abstaining from voting will be noted by officers. Okay, so item 1 of the agenda this evening is apologies for absence. Apologies have been received from councillors Daniel Efty, Eileen Gadsden, Michael Hoy, Tracy Knight, Joe McPherson, Gary Myers, David Sharp and Loreen Shaw. Any other apologies that we need to make a note of, members? No? Okay. Item 2 is substitute members. We have Councillor Sperring substituting for Councillor Loreen Shaw, Councillor Vilma Wilson substituting for Councillor Tony Carter, and Councillor Christine Mason substituting for Councillor Michael Hoy. Welcome to you three. Any other substitutes? Okay. Item number 3, non-members attending. I don't think there are any, are there? No. Okay, item number 4, minutes held on the meeting on the 18th of January 2022, which have been circulated, but I'm aware the only person around this table who was at that meeting is Councillor Williams. So we're all looking at you. Do you agree them?
Think about it, yes. Agreed.
Okay, thank you. Item number 5 is to receive declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest, members? Okay, none. Okay, now we come on to the main businesses of the evening. Item number 6, which is a proposal for an increase to the Hackney carriage tariff by reducing the yardage. Council's Principal Licensing Officer Stephen Greeno will present the report, and Caris Brooke is also here, Licensing Officer, if any questions need to be asked of her. So over to you, Steve.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. This is a report proposed for an increase to the Hackney carriage tariff by reducing the yardage. I'll go through it as much as I can because it is quite technical. That it still refers to yards rather than metres, and we'll try and work our way through it. The licensing team have received an application from the licensing trade to change the current Hackney carriage tariff that has been in place since April 2017. In accordance with the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act, the licensing team have followed due process and consulted with the trade and the public over the proposals. And the final stage of the process is to obtain support from the members to support or reject the proposal. Point 2 of the report outlines the proposed chart as to what they would like to include, and that is to maintain the current starting fare, which is currently at £3, to remain as it is, to reduce the yardage from 203.83 yards to 175 yards until it reaches £8 on the metre. Then after £8 on the metre, reduce the yardage to from 152.93 yards to 142 yards after the £8, and also as well to reintroduce the spoilage charge of £100, which basically covers the cleaning of the vehicle and the loss of earnings. All other fees are to remain the same. The reason for the proposed increase has been set out in Appendix A in the document that is in the report, but the main sort of points that they have highlighted relates to the increases in the cost of running a taxi, increases in general inflation, comparisons with other transportation costs increases, and the affordability to the customer compared to average wage increase. What I have done is, within the report, I have tried to break it down a little bit easier for you on the following page, on page 6.2, as to what the current fare is, what the proposed fare is, and the difference. The main points really is the starting fare doesn't change. After 1 mile, there'll be a 20p increase. 3 miles, it's £1 increase. 4 miles, it's £1.20, and 15 miles is £3. I've also included, as part of Appendix B, is the flow chart in the process that we have to follow, following the decision of the committee here, that we then ask for it to go to full council for their approval, and then we have to legally advertise it for 14 days before it takes effect. On the 7th of April 2022, the licensing team sent an email to all the Hackney Carriage drivers of the proposal, with the end of the consultation as being the 6th of May 2022 and postal returns by the 12th of May 2022. The survey was sent to 247 drivers. 34% of the drivers responded, so it was 85 drivers. The results showed that 94.1% of the drivers supported the increase and 5.9% of the drivers did not feel that they could support it. Based on this result, the survey was then taken on to the next stage, which was the public survey. The public consultation started on the 13th of May 2022 with a press statement by the Council's communications team, and the consultation concluded on the 15th of June 2022 to allow the minimum 30 days requirement within the legislation. During that consultation period, the Council received 8 responses from members of the public, and a copy of the consultation that was sent out is also part of Appendix C. The survey found that 3 of those that had responded to the fare increase supported the fare increase, and 5 people did not support the change. 3.11 really highlights the comment that came back, and that was, in my experience, Rochford's taxi fares are already more expensive than similar adjoining districts, especially when considering late night surcharges. Taxis are vital for the elderly community, and as such, a challenging time with the current cost of living. This, in my view, is completely inappropriate. That leads me nicely on to 5.1, which is the breakdown of the authorities based on the documentation issued by the Private Hire and Taxi magazine. We provide those figures to them on a monthly basis, and this is a snapshot of where we are within Essex. Uttlesford is the most expensive within the county at a 2-mile fare, and Rochford, as you can see, sits roughly in the middle at 7th at £6.20. If the proposed fare increase was to go ahead, it will go to £6.60. That will bring us in line with Brentwood and Harlow. I've also included some documentation to assist you with making the decision, and 5.3 is the petrol prices that have been issued by the Office of National Statistics. So this is based on figures that they control, and it's an overall figure across the whole of the UK from the major operators. As you can see, at the time of me writing the report, the fuel cost was 198.93 for diesel and 190.93 for unleaded petrol. As you can see from the chart, it has had a significant increase, certainly over the last sort of 12 months. On the next page, I've also included the CPI, or Consumer Price Index figures, again, that have been issued by the Office of National Statistics, that show that obviously the Consumer Price Index has also seen a significant increase as well. I'm going to draw your attention to paragraph 6 of the report and a previous fare increase applications. An application was made by the trade on the 1st of July 2020, where they were then at the time refused the proposal, and then they submitted a further application in October 2021, and the trade proposed at the time a increase to maintain the current starting fare and to reduce the yardage at that time to 186 yards from the 203 yards, and to reduce after £8 to 142, where it's currently 152.93. In relation to the proposal, I'll jump to that if that's okay, that the application by the trade to be determined for a fare increase as outlined in Appendix A to this report, taking into account the representations received and the contents of this report. If the committee is minded to approve the proposed increase, that it be agreed that the implementation date of the increases to be delegated to the Assistant Director of People and Communities in consultation with the portfolio holder for licensing, and that this will be no later than the end of August 2022. And that's the end of the report.
Thank you, Stephen. Members, so we've heard the report. Would any members like to ask any questions of either of them? Councillor Mrs Mason.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd just like to ask 3 questions, if I may. That, and forgive me if they're in the report, I did read it a few days ago and might have missed it. The number of licences that we have issued, how do they relate to the number of licences that, say, we had in July 2019, pre-pandemic? Have we got any knowledge of that?
We do. We saw a 30% reduction in drivers because of COVID. In the end of last year, we brought a report to the licensing committee that we identified that was a significant problem with the lack of drivers being out there, certainly on a Friday and Saturday night, certainly with safeguarding issues around individuals. So at that time, we introduced a scheme called the Earn As You Learn scheme, which has allowed us to reduce the time period it takes for taxi drivers to get out there initially. So what we do is we issue them, they have to complete the same checks as everyone else, apart from the stumbling block that they have, which is the knowledge test, which takes approximately about 3 to 6 months for them to pass. Obviously, anyone coming into that trade, if they know that they can't work for 3 to 6 months, then we're going to struggle with bringing that sort of the drivers into the trade. So what the committee agreed was that they could do a fast-track system, or the Earn As You Learn, providing they met the same requirements that we have in place for private hire drivers. Then we could issue them with a badge for a period of 9 months, and during that 9-month window that they can then work, but also learn the roads and the routes, so that they can then take their knowledge test within that 9-month window. If they do take it within that 9-month window, then we switch the badge over to a Hackney Carriage badge. If they don't complete it in that 9-month window, then they have to reapply for a new badge after 12 months. That scheme has worked really, really well. We brought it in January. We've had 2 drivers so far that have completed all the way through and been issued their Hackney Carriage badge. We have, I had the figures only the other day, I think it's 26 drivers that we've issued that are out there under the Earn As You Learn, and we have 19 new applicants currently going through at the moment. So we are bucking the trend compared to the rest of the county, and what I can then show you nationally, the figures have shown that we've got a decrease, whereas Rochford actually is seeing an increase.
Yeah, can I just come back on that, Mr. Chairman? You said 30% decrease, but 30% of what?
It was
Roughly.
It was 320 drivers we had pre-COVID.
So we've lost about 90, and we've got about, on your figures, about 45 coming back, 50%.
We've got about 45 so far.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
we're 50% there. Thank you. So I've got 2 other questions, if I may, Mr. Chairman. You've given us some charts of the increase of the yardage and the effect it has on the pricing on 3.2, I believe it will be, on page 6.2. Is there anywhere in the report, I hate to ask this because I should have worked it out myself, but I haven't, what is the percentage increase roughly in pounds, shillings and pence? I know you're saying £10 goes to 11.20, but when it comes to the, which is relatively easy to work out, but when it comes to the other, you've got the percentage, you've got the difference, how much it's in pounds, shillings and pence, but bearing in mind the other figures that we've been given are in percentage increases, is there anywhere that we can have a rough idea of the percentages that they will increase by?
I'll quickly do some maths calculations.
Thank you.
And you'll see the screen suddenly change a bit.
Thank you, and perhaps... Brilliant, thank you. I think it just...
15% up to the first £8.
Yeah.
Sorry, Chair, shouldn't speak out.
That's feel free.
No, it's very helpful. Without a calculator.
Under 8% above the £8 level.
Thank you. And I think that helps put it in perspective. And the other thing I was quite interested to note in your report that you say that you supply figures on a monthly basis to the taxi or the Hackney carriage,
To the magazine, yes.
to the magazine. Have you always done that, and are those figures readily available?
Yes, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I'd probably like to speak later, but at the moment, that's my questions
Okay.
answered. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs Mason. Councillor Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the complaints, or the complaint, was about the late night surcharge, and I can't see that addressed anywhere. So can you tell us what the late night surcharge is, please?
I can, yes. The extra charges, I'll read them out because I've got the direct fare table in front of me here. For hiring beginning between 10:30 p.m. and 6 a.m. Also on Sundays and bank holidays between 6 a.m. and midnight, there is an additional fee of £2 is added to the starting fare. So after 10:30 at night, the starting fare starts at £5 rather than £3.
Okay.
Also on Sundays and bank holidays.
But the actual rate per yard doesn't change?
No, the only time it does change is on Christmas Day. The hire begins at 9 p.m. on the 24th of December and 6 a.m. on the 27th of December, and between 9 p.m. on the 31st of December and 6 a.m. on the 2nd of December, it's double fares.
Thank
So it
you.
doubles.
Supplementary question, if I may,
Sure.
or an additional question rather. All of the comparisons have been taken at 2 miles. I don't know whether that's an average journey, but bearing in mind the initial charge is the higher proportion, I'd like to have seen some comparisons at, say, 4 miles, 6 miles, 10 miles, which are, I think, quite common sort of distances as well.
Yeah, I don't have that information. Like I say, it's all published by the magazine, so I've literally just picked out all of our councils out of the Appendix D right at the very, very back. Yeah, that should have been included. I haven't got the other fare tables unless I might be able to quickly pull up a couple of others that, while I've got a computer or an internet connection, I might be able to do a few bits there for you to give you some figures, if you give me
Yeah,
some
I
time
think-
to work on that.
Thank you, Stephen. I think that would be useful to look at. Thank you.
Okay.
Councillor Mrs Belton.
Thank you. Just a couple of points regarding the percentages. I think they need to be double checked because 20p is 5% roughly of £4.40 and £4 is about 8%. So just so that we don't have any crossed wires, if we can just pull it up on the calculator just so that we're all clear. I'll be honest, having read the report, I'm in full support of this increase. There's never a good time to increase prices, but there's also never a good time to not have your wages increased when the cost of living is going up for everybody. So having read all of the details of the report and given it thought on both sides, I really think after 5 years of no increase, it's viable. We're seeing a loss of taxi drivers. We're seeing taxi drivers become delivery drivers. We're seeing a real reduction, although we're gradually starting to increase that again. think we all, if anyone's tried to get a taxi in the last 6 months, they'll know how challenging it is in comparison to pre-COVID. So personally, I am in favour of this increase. I don't think they're asking for an awful lot. When you look at the percentages, which to my loose maths was about 5 to 8% overall, fuel costs have gone up dramatically. I think it's reasonable. I think it's a reasonable request, and I think 5 years of no change is long enough, in my opinion. I appreciate I'm new to licensing, but based on the report that I've read and the consultations that I've seen online for the past year or so, I think this is a reasonable request. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm aware that Councillor Mrs Mason and Councillor Cross wish to speak. I'm just going to give other members a chance first, if that's okay. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chairman. I've really got concerns over this. We're having bus routes cut in Rochford. We're now down to, I think it's from July 3 number 7s an hour. I'm not sure how many it is on the number 8 route, but the number 8 route is going completely on a Sunday. So local residents will have to use, if they don't drive a taxi, or stay indoors. I do have serious concerns about, especially for retired people, pensioners on a fixed budget. They can't increase their income. Is there any way that this could be index linked so that when fuel goes down, the cost of the increase goes down?
It can be done in a way. Southend and Castle Point have done it slightly differently. Rather than see a general increase, what they have agreed is that to add a extra surcharge onto the extras area, where they can charge an extra 40p once the petrol prices reach a certain stage. That has to be approved obviously by the Assistant Director for those areas and also the portfolio holder. And they're using the same figures as what we are, which is the Office of National Statistics. So they monitor those and then they authorise it for a set period of time that 40p increase could then be used.
So that's an extra 40p overall?
Over, on top of what is the fare, yes.
Right, thank you. Yes, for now, thank you.
Councillor Sperry.
Thank you, Chairman. Listening to Councillor Belton's comments, I fully support them. I also take on board what Councillor Williams has said about the older generation. In the business that I'm involved in, a lot of the older generation are entirely dependent on the taxi fares. They are missing out on events now because there are not enough taxi drivers now. They're turning up an hour late, and these are regular people who phone in to the local taxi companies. They're well known. They're not getting any priority treatment. They're missing events, and I just feel that if we don't support this, then we're going to go back to the pre-COVID days. Taxi drivers will look for another area, delivery drivers and all this sort of stuff, because that business is continuing to grow, and I just feel that we won't be doing our residents any favours, to be honest. I think they will just find that they will be effectively housebound, because there'll be no bus routes, as you say, and they won't be able to get any taxis because they just won't be available. Thank you, Chairman. I think Chris.
I've got no sounding. Councillor Mrs Wilson.
Hello, thank you. I've been doing a bit of digging into this because the bit that fascinated me the most, or concerned me the most, whichever way you want to look at it, was actually the price of fuel going forward, because I do fully support this and feel that the taxi drivers have had a really rough deal recently. And I was really surprised when I read this that they've had no increase for such a long while. I've read two reports, granted online, but both from very reputable organisations, that they reckon that with what's going on in the world at the moment, that within the next 6 months, the best case scenario would be that unleaded petrol would reduce by a maximum of 50 pence per litre. This report here on Appendix A gives the cost, or gives the comparisons at 123 a litre. Well, if fuel went down by 50 pence a litre, that's still a lot more than this. And taxi drivers, the same as the rest of us, have had cost of living issues to deal with, and that's part of the reason why I support this, because even if fuel does decrease as much as these reports that I've read said it will, it still won't really cover the additional increases that taxi drivers will face. With what Councillor Sperrin said, I think we need to keep as many taxis in our borough as we can for our residents. That's it, thank you.
Councillor Webb.
Just ask a question, please, around the reintroduction of the spoilage charge. Yes. Could I just ask how that works? Who makes the decision if that will be applied? Because it's sort of, I guess, could be open to abuse in terms of, is there a point at which it gets applied, and who would make that decision, please?
Yeah, that is down to the taxi driver. If someone is ill within a vehicle, which is the reason why it's mainly sort of brought in for, and they were sick in the vehicle, then obviously they would have to go and get that vehicle cleaned, and then that just basically allows the taxi driver to have the authority to show that there is a spoilage charge that they can charge of a maximum up to £100 for them to go and get the car cleaned while they're also losing work as well.
So can I just check? So just to clarify, that would only apply if somebody was sick in the car. It wouldn't apply if somebody, say, spilled a drink in the back of the car.
It wouldn't necessarily stop them from operating. And if I find that it was that someone was charging £100 for a sport drink in the car, then I would be looking into that matter.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'm conscious there's two other members who wish to speak. Any other member who's not spoken who wants to speak? Councillor Mrs Mason.
Thank you, Chair. Must remember this. Right, I take on board Councillor Williams' concerns, and as my ward is adversely affected by the failure of the number 8 bus route, I share his concern. But we are concentrating on the taxi service tonight, and I think we have to take buses somewhat out of the equation. The concern I have, and I must admit I support what Councillor Belton, Sperring and Wilson have said, that we have a problem, we have a supply problem, there's supply and demand. And if someone has a hospital appointment, they need to rely on a taxi that will turn up. At the moment, there's an inadequate supply, and I've experienced it myself where taxis haven't turned up even when booked days in advance. And the other thing that I've become aware of is that I've spoken to some, I say younger than me, but in their 20s, young ladies and girls that would normally go out at night, and they're not going out at night because they can't be sure getting a taxi back, and they consequently feel unsafe. So there's a knock-on effect to the nighttime economy as well. So I do support this. However, I am concerned that it's been 5 years, and although we have looked at this, I see in 20 and 21, I'd like to formalise that. And for that reason, I'd like to put a motion forward that hopefully will be supported, that this committee implements a regular review, either annually or biannually. I prefer annually, but if the committee chairman prefers annually, fine, of the Hackney carriage tariff, taking into account increases and decreases in fuel prices, inflation rates and other criteria as deemed appropriate with effect from the 2023 municipal year. Because I am concerned that having seen this, we've had an application in 2012, we had an application in 2017, we had one in 2020 which was refused, one in 21, and now from October 21 we're talking about August 22. That I do think the committee should be looking at this on a regular basis. So I would like to propose that if I have a seconder.
But just before you, Mrs Mason, before you get the seconder, can I just check with Steve, because I know that's not the norm, legislation permits us to do that?
We would still follow the same process, that we would still put it out for the drivers for the consultation and then the public consultation.
That doesn't preclude us from
no.
reviewing it. Right, thank you. Thank you, Mrs Mason.
No, there's nothing that precludes us. It's really to consider the effectiveness for this committee to look. We've just heard it, we've lost effectively 45 plus drivers. So this committee could consider the effectiveness of any increase and decrease in maintaining the level of service provision in relation to demand. And that will allow perhaps us to be preventing a problem rather than, as we are now, curing a problem. So that's my proposal.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs Mason. Does anybody wish to second that motion?
Second.
Councillor Mrs Squires-Coleman, thank you. Members, we're now going to speak on the motion that Councillor Mrs Mason has moved and Councillor Mrs Squires-Coleman has seconded. Does any member wish to speak on that particular motion alone, please?
Yes.
Councillor Cross.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm wholeheartedly in agreement with what Councillor Mrs Mason has said. I would like to see it as being every 2 years. And I didn't want it misconstrued, my earlier questions, that I wasn't in favour of an increase to the taxi rates. I'm very much in favour of that. My questions really were, is this increase enough? Because if we are only going to review it every 2 years, it needs to preempt any increases. I think this is only just about recovering what's already been lost. So I was actually pushing for a greater increase to take it up nearer to the the higher levels that are on there. Perhaps not as much as the maximum one, but yes, I'm all in favour of a biannual review. Thank you, Chair.
But I was leaving that because I thought it would be then up to the chair's discretion. So no strong feelings one way or the other.
Okay. Any other member wish to speak on that motion? I'd like to say one point, actually, because it was something I was going to bring up when we were talking about the main issue this evening. And I understand where Councillor Cross is coming from with regards to the catch-up. I think we all perceive there's a huge catch-up for two reasons. One, because there's been a long delay since we last did this. So I actually support the review, and I will support this motion, because I think that actually it is right that we do this. We do review it. I'm not saying we put it up. It's right that we review it, review it. But looking at the chart on 5.3 on page 6.4, there's a huge, a very, very steep increase, which is probably in line with the invasion in Ukraine. And so I think that's probably distorted figures somewhat. Now, we are where we are. The price of fuel is where it is. But I don't, I'd like to think that I'd like to hope, I should say, that the war in Ukraine is going to come to an end at some point, and the fuel crisis will revert back to its previous levels. So I think that's distorted things slightly. But on that subject, I do think a review is a good idea. Any other member wish to speak on this motion before I bring Councillor Cross back in? No, Councillor Cross.
Just to say, I think it's before the invasion of Ukraine, but it's I would say, directly linked to the value of the pound against the dollar, which after Brexit did plummet, and oil is paid for in dollars per barrel. So I think it's in line with the fall in the value of the pound.
Thank you.
Mention that.
Would you like me to read that for clarity again?
I think it would be really handy
And
if
I
you wouldn't mind.
I can give it to the
if you could
officers
just commit
afterwards.
to a time scale that you would, because
Yes.
I'd like a time scale on the motion.
No problem. The motion is that this committee implements a regular review biannually of the Hackney carriage tariff, taking into account increases and decreases in fuel prices, inflation rates, and other criteria as deemed appropriate, to consider the effectiveness of any increase, decrease in maintaining the level of service provision in relation to demand, refuse to take effect from the 2023 municipal year.
Mrs. Squires-Coleman, are you still happy to second that?
Absolutely.
You are, okay. You happy with that? What you've got, yeah. Members, you've heard the motion on the table in front of you. All those in favour, please indicate now. That's unanimous. Thank you, members. That motion is carried. Members, we now return back to the main discussion, which is the report in front of us, item 6. Now, I've still got Councillor Cross on my list of people wishing to speak on that. Would you, because you put your hand up before, I know you've spoken on Councillor Mrs Mason's motion. Do you wish to speak again, or are you happy with, you've said what you wanted to say?
I'm happy with
Good.
thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak this item. I'm just going to say one thing on this. I think this comes down to two things, really. Looking after the taxi trade and looking after our residents. Looking after our taxi trade because we need to keep a taxi trade. We need to look after our taxi drivers. And in a sense, it was quite interesting talking to Steve before this meeting, and he put it quite aptly, the fact that in effect we're their employers and we're deciding their wages. And that actually brings it all home, really. You know, when you talk about considering somebody's wages. I was quite shocked when I read this report at how long well, my initial thing, I think I didn't go to like a typical bloke, I didn't go to the start of the report, I went halfway through. And I looked at the prices, and I was quite surprised by the price. I thought, well, why are you asking for an 8 to 9% increase in prices when, you know, train drivers aren't getting it and other people aren't getting it? But actually, when you look at the last time there was an increase, it's quite some time ago, and I think that puts it all into perspective, really. I think the comments that have been made this evening about keeping the trade alive are very, very valid. I think the comments about looking after the residents are very valid as well, because it does concern me about the demographic of people who do use taxis, but personally, I do support this as well. So if no one else wishes to speak, I'm going to take this to the vote. Members, are you happy? There's two proposals before you. I'm going to read them out, and then please indicate if you're happy to take these en bloc or if anybody would like to take them separately. So the recommendations before us are that the application by the trade be determined for a fare increase as outlined within Appendix A to this report, taking into account the representations received and the contents of this report. If the committee is minded to approve the proposed increase, that it be agreed that the implementation date of the increased fares be delegated to the Assistant Director, People and Communities, in consultation with the portfolio holder for licensing, and that this be no later than the end of August 2022. Does any member wish to take these recommendations separately? If not, we will take them en bloc. Okay, members, you've heard the recommendations before you. All those in favour, please indicate. And that's unanimous. Those proposals are carried. Thank you, members. Members, that's the end of the business for this evening, and therefore the time is now 7 minutes past 8, and this meeting is closed. Thank you very much for your attendance.